Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Let's Talk Leadership live session. And today we've got a sort of European and American connection going on, and a new face as well. So first of all, big welcome to Susie Pecuch, who's joining us all the way from the west coast of Florida. Hi, Susie. Great to see you.
Hello. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. And Ara is back with us again from Holland. And Brit is...
Matthew, hi, everyone.
Hi. And Brit is now back in Holland, having been in the UK, and Ian and I are still stuck in the UK.
We're still here, Matthew. We're still here.
Hanging on like grim death. Yeah. But anyway, it's great to see everyone. And this afternoon, we're going to be looking, and the reason that Susie's joined us, we're going to be looking at the whole customer experience and then linking that back to leadership. And I'm going to leave Ara and Susie, who know each other well and go back a long way, certainly back as far as Manchester University Business School, to sort of set the scene and the context. And if you want to join in, you can see we've got the live stream at the bottom. So ask any questions, join on the chat, and we'll do our best to respond. Anyway, so where are we going to start? Susie, would you like to sort of kick off by saying a little bit about your background and where you started?
Absolutely. Greetings from Florida. Glad to be back over in Europe and the UK. Good to be back via Zoom. I have my own business and I help companies get their customer to do the marketing for them. And basically, at the end of the day, the number one form of marketing is what your customer tells other people. Not only that they come back, but that they go bring their neighbors, their friends, their family. And in the most studies, including the Net Promoter and Reichhold study, the only question that you asked on a survey that actually predicted or correlated with business success dollars, bottom line, was, will you recommend us? And you needed to get an 8, 9, or 10 out of 10 to be passionate recommending, hey, go there, you have to try this. And that is energy, and that's marketing, and that's money, and that's success. So that's the bottom line. Now, 67% of the people said they recommend or based on the whole experience. So you might have a good product, but if they come in and they're mistreated or they can't find you on the internet or different things are happening, they get frustrated. Instead, they turn and do anti-marketing. So that's what my whole business is based on. And it comes from my background, which I started at Disney World. And we really created magic. And that's what we did. We tried to have everybody who left there come back and bring somebody with them. And guess what? The most important thing was not even the guest experience, that we stood in their shoes and did that, but that we did that for the employees inside too. Oh. So the external and the internal go hand in hand. And it's like the pebble in the pond. Whatever's happening inside, from the leadership to the team, that's what flows out. So I tell my clients, you hire me to help you with your customers, but if we can only do one thing, we'll start inside and create an experience where people who work here recommend working here and also tell other people to come here. So that's my background. So I work from the customer back in through the organization. And then I went to study for my master's in Manchester, and that's where I met Ira.
That's right, Susie. That's where we met. I think you just come from Disney at that point. And so we did our master's together a few years ago now. And then today we work with customers, as you said, both from starting from the perspective of the customer outside the organization, and also from the leader's perspective. So we kind of make the link between the leader, the climate they create for the employees, and then the experience employees have with the customers. So you approach it from the outside in, and I approach it from the inside out. And then we work with leaders and teams kind of to try and link the two. And I think that's where you have the power, because often, as we know, as organizations start to grow, they tend to focus a little bit more internally. If you ask many leaders in organizations, what are the main sources of your challenges and problems, they tend to be largely internally driven rather than external. And so I think that's kind of where you and I, work with leaders and customers in order to really enhance the climate in organizations. And leaders play a really important role in that, which is a good insight. And then that positive climate impacts the customers, and the customer keeps coming back. So that's kind of our kind of combined focus together.
Great. Well, I remember a few years ago sitting in Washington, D.C., and we were with a global client, and they brought a couple of their customers in to speak to the top 50 executives that were meeting. And one of them, I don't know whether she still is, but she was the CEO of the George Washington Hospital in Washington. And she recorded very similar comments to the ones that you've just made, in that she was sitting in a meeting one day and all her senior team were telling her about all the data for the hospital and all the analytics and how many beds were occupied and meals served and all of that. And she said she had to stop the meeting and she asked the question, where is the patient in all of this?
Yeah.
She said they'd been talking for about an hour and not once had they mentioned anything about the patient experience.
Yes.
It's an interesting area that you work in. So tell us a bit more about it.
Well, exactly. It's the head and the heart have to come into business. And I will tell people, executives, if you don't think that that taking care of your people or training or standing in your employee shoes matters, then I'm just going to tell you, you're being stupid, because that's everything right there. It's really important that you think about people are human beings, both your employees and your customers. And I always say, look through their window, and there's 4 things to look for. What do they need? Okay, so they're coming to a restaurant, they need food, they're coming here, they need a job, but what do they want? And then it starts to get different, what different people want. And then here's one that, particularly at my Disney days, what do they expect? Always think about what they expect their first day on the job to be like, or when they come to your business, and then say, how can I add one more little thing? How can I do one special thing or one different thing? It doesn't even have to be big, but always thinking of how can I exceed their expectation by just a little bit? And then what's their emotional state?
Yeah.
And if you're in the hospital business, if you're in the medical business, you can never forget people are walking in there with things on their mind, fear, all sorts of things. You cannot just tune out of that. You have to draw a boundary, but any business, what are the people feeling? And right now, with this climate of all the change we're all going through globally, every single person is feeling some level of anxiety or fear. So you have to really stand in their shoes and think, what can I do to make them want to work here, be excited to work here, feel good, and be able to turn to their friend and say, oh, I love working here. You should apply. Or turn to their neighbor and say, come to our business. We're great because, and what do you want them to say?
Yeah. Well, I remember before the pandemic when all of us were flying and flying ludicrous distances and frequencies. And I mean, talk about carbon footprint. I used to dread getting on the last flight home from anywhere, because by the time particularly on the short flights in Europe, you could tell that the in-flight team had been on the go for about 12 hours, had served numerous people like me who all wanted something they hadn't got. And if you were on the last flight out of Zurich or the last flight out of Moscow, where it was, they had to be terribly, terribly careful not to just let rip and say, oh, stuff it, I can't be bothered. And just occasionally they did. And you're right, it leaves quite an impact, an impression.
Yes, so you have to, everybody has to have patience, and you have to remember, they used to tell us at Disney, when I started at Disney, you take your marketing and your communication degree from Pitt and you go work on the front line of Disney and you take tickets at the ticket gate. But that's where I learned maybe more than anything, because even if there's 10,000 people passing through that gate, every one of them, it's they maybe saved their whole life to come here, or maybe it's their special day, or maybe there's something really sad going on in their family and this is their one time to be together. And you can never forget that. It's a human business. Business is human, and every single person matters coming in there, and you have to have patience because they're not all nice, but don't take that out on the next one. So the same thing goes inside. Every employee, you think you know them, but they're walking in to work that day with something going on in their life. We don't have to become psychologists, but we need to be aware of that.
Exactly. And I think building on your point, Susie, and Brit, you and I talked about this the other day, there's something about, as a leader, when you're working, with your internal customers, it's being mindful of their needs. And I think with COVID and all the pressure and stresses that we're under, the risk is that any sort of division that is there by design, let's say between, a scientific function and a commercial function in a biotech company, any place where there's a division leads to greater likelihood that there'll be more difficulties. So as leaders, how do you improve collaboration with other departments? How do you put yourself in their shoes if they're dependent on you for their for their services and so on and so forth. Because under pressure, we'll tend to create more division, more in-group and out-group. So I think that's something we also focus, right, Susie, with our work. So how do we help groups build bridges, either externally to customers or internally to other departments that are dependent on what we're creating? So that's another application of this kind of framework.
And to add on to that, how do you help them build the bridge? Again, you remind them to stand in their shoes, but you also have to have some measurement. And I tell every one of my clients, what gets measured is what gets done. If you're not measuring, don't bother. Because even if I mean well, if I'm busy and I'm tired, it's like I don't have time for that. But if I know that things are being tracked, numbers are coming back, someone could be the mystery shopper that walks in the door. The one day that I feel like I'm just going to lose it and snap, I think, I'm usually such a good employee, and that'll be the mystery shopper. So it'll help me stay on track. So if people, and I think measurement can be fun. I think it can almost be a game. Like if teams are getting scores on what their customers are saying, and then you say to them, now, what do you need to change? You guys go for it. And so it's not a punishment. It's actually a very reinforcing thing, saying, look how great we did, or we moved up over here, or now they're saying this. They used to say this about us. Now we want them. Now they're saying this. This is what we want them to say. I always say, find the one word that you own, that you want people to feel about you and say about you. At Disney, it was magic. Just like what is the thing that makes you different? So you're a restaurant. So you're a hospital. What is the thing that makes you different? And and then build that, make that happen.
Exactly. And I think those kind of metrics could be helpful. That will appeal to certain people. And I think at the same time, what we're trying to do is to encourage leaders to talk to people in other functions. It sounds so simple, right? But when people are really under pressure, when they're on Zoom calls from 8 in the morning till 6 at night, or I was working with somebody yesterday who's on Zoom calls from 8 in the morning till 11 at night. So how do you then create time and space so you can have a conversation? So you ask your counterpart, what do they need? In what way are we meeting your expectations? If you were to tell us, if we change one thing, what would that look like? So again, it's the idea of the outside in, because often in organizations, we're very internally focused. As leaders become more senior, they tend to move further away from the customers. So if you look at the work on founders mentality, which is also work that we do, one of the questions is, how much access do you have, dear senior leader, to people at the front line, right? So as you grow in the organization, if you're a sales rep, then you become a sales manager, then you're maybe a business unit manager, business unit director. You're further and further away from the customers, actually on the front line. So a very tangible question that we ask when working with founders and startup companies is, are you valuing data you're getting from your frontline staff? Number one. Number two is, are you actually taking into account what your frontline staff are saying? Because there may be 2-3 levels further down the organizations, admittedly not so much in a startup, but let's say in the bigger companies as they scale. So that importance of outside in for leaders, when they're very busy focusing on their tasks, managing their teams, really is an essential requirement, I would say. And I think we work with leaders, I think all of us here on this call, to help expand their repertoire, right? So I work with a lot of STEM leaders in science and technology. They lead by expertise. So it's about making themselves broader. Now, with pressure, with COVID, with being virtual, the natural reaction is for peripheral vision to narrow. So we know this on research on resilience. So if you're narrowing your focus, it's for survival, it's to get things done. And what we're advocating is outside in and expanding your repertoire. And it could be a bit of a tweak to the leadership style. And I think it speaks as well to maybe assumptions we have as leaders that, what does it mean to be a leader? Well, I need to be directive. I need to tell my staff what to do. I need to know more than them. And what we're kind of making a case for here is, ensure you get data from your customers, be they internal or be they external. So,
and if I can add to that, one thing Ira and I really work on when we work with clients together is listening. The number one thing you can do with your employees is listen to them and not make assumptions. And so when we work with top leaders and try to help them solve their problem, we listen to them and let them help work through the process themselves. So sometimes it's not about the tactics and the action and the ideas. It's about, where am I stuck? What really matters here? What are we really trying to accomplish? And if you don't, once you start to feel that and see that, we get the aha moment where all of a sudden they can help come out of their stuck place because they need time to kind of think it all the way through, rather than just us saying, here's 10 things you should do that'll help you be a better leader. It's more like, where are you stuck and what's going on with you?
Exactly. So we work with leaders in their context. What are you working on? What do you need? We don't provide expertise. Here are the top 10 tips on X, Y, and Z. Tell us your context. And I think this is what leaders can do with each other, or with their peers, is to help understand, well, what is your challenge, and then using listening skills, questioning skills, and things like that, how do you help someone discover what's important to them? We've had that experience, Susie, where we've worked with leaders. They come to a challenge or come to our discussion with a real challenge. It seems to be an insurmountable problem. I don't know really how to fix it. And through our kind of questioning from the customer perspective and the leader perspective, we help them sort of make sense of their challenge and find a way forward.
So Ira, I'm curious. Sorry to interrupt, Matthew. I see we got a couple of chat messages in our chats here around this one word, and I'm curious to know, Susie and Ira, if in the activities that you do with the people that you work with, if you've ever challenged the leaders themselves in terms of who is the customer of their leadership, for them to define their leadership in one word. I'd love to know some of the answers that people come back with to say this is what makes my leadership unique. So come be led by me. That would be pretty cool. Any experience of that?
Yeah, I can think of someone. Susie, do you want to?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that there's someone we worked with recently who said he was not clear about his value proposition. So he was making transition from being, senior executive in a biotech company to actually becoming an independent, and he was wondering if that was a good transition for him. And he said, "Look, I really don't know my value proposition." So it's kind of linked to your point about leadership style, but we asked him, I think primarily led by Susie, what do your customers need? What can you offer that would be different from others? What's unique about your offer? And through our questioning, so we were not saying, well, knowing you as we do, here's what we would recommend, or here's what we think you can do. It was more about, well, what would your customers think about you? What would they come to you for uniquely rather than someone else? So it is that point of focus. The word one is so powerful, right? Like one challenge, one thing you can offer to your customers. Yeah.
Particularly interested in the leader and the person or the people that they lead in terms of their management,
yes,
the shadow that casts over the organization, as opposed to the customers of that team's performance. I'm curious about that.
Well, yeah, and actually they go together, because if I want the customer to say, I worked with an amazing residential therapeutic boarding school for young boys who were struggling, and then they go and live there and work with counselors and teachers and everything. And there's a lot of those types of schools. And the owner of this school, she said, I want this school to feel like home. I don't want it to feel like an institution or a boarding school. And it's in the woods and it's beautiful. So everything we did, we added a flavor of, does this feel like home? Does it feel comfortable? Does it feel safe? Is it just you walk in and you have that deep breath, not like it's a business. And that's for the employees as well as the customers, the families who send their children there. So we had to create that inside so that the team also feels like they enjoy coming there. It feels like just a nice place to work, not a corporate place to work. So that really distinguishes their school. And each business comes up with their word, or what do you want them to walk away and say? And then we could turn around and look and go, okay, if you want them to say this feels like home, but they come in here and there's 25 metal file cabinets in the front door in the middle of this beautiful lodge, there's a disconnect here. So the experience is not just, it's about the people and the product, but it's about the environment and the systems. Do they all bring that word to life? So it's like you have to really think about every action that you do and say, would this make people feel at home? Would this make people feel like it's magic? I know Ira and I, one word we have in common is authenticity. We just want to be ourselves and encourage our clients to find themselves, be themselves, and bring out their natural best self, not teach them how to be a good leader. It's about bringing that natural self into it and then appreciating people. So that's one of the words that we always talk about.
Yeah, and I think, Susie, building on your point there too, there's something about the other, right? So you're talking about these boys in this residential home. So as leaders, as employees, we're thinking about how does our behavior, how does our environment that we create impact the other, typically outside the organization. So again, I've worked in biotech, as you all know. The focus is on patients. So how do our choices in the company, how we allocate resources, how we make decisions, things that we prioritize, what does that mean for the patient? Does the patient get access to treatment sooner? Would this improve their experience, not only by the treatment itself, but by the level of service as well? So are we supporting the patient and their family? Because often the caregivers are overlooked of patients with rare diseases, so, or in other therapeutic areas as well. So, and I think that's very compelling for many people. So they get away from being in the weeds and the details to think, how does my behavior, how does my efforts impact those outside who are dependent on what we're doing? That feels like a very powerful kind of purpose in a way that would drive behavior in a sustainable way that is positive. It's not only, if you say that versus, hey, we need to increase by 10%, that's not so compelling for many people, or, today you just got 10, tomorrow you need to get 11. That will work for certain people for sure. And it's kind of a more, so it's an external purpose that also has an emotional, kind of almost human component to it as well.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, the customer is anyone who needs your product or service. So that can be the neighbor next door to your business. That can be the community. That can be people who work there, the vendors you work with, the people who come, the people who know the most about your business are the ones who like come in and deliver things that, that they're just dropping off, or they're part of a delivery business. They will walk away and say, oh, you know what really happens there? So it's like, how do you treat them? It's like, how do you be yourself all the time with everyone you come in contact with? I was stopping at it was like a phone store, like a jitterbug phone store or something once. And I was on my way across Florida, and I said to them, is there like a place where I can get a coffee or tea somewhere around here? And they were like, no. And I said, I'm heading down that way towards Tampa. Is there anything? And they were like, no, I don't know. And I literally walked out, and across the highway was a Starbucks. And I went back in and I said, there's a Starbucks over there. And they're going, oh yeah, that's new. And it's like, so if I was Starbucks, I would come over and bring them some coffee so that when their customers say, I'd like a cup of coffee, that they would say, they're great. They're great Starbucks. They're right over there. So anyone who is sharing the word about you, you need to think about how you're interacting with them and really intentionally be available and stand in their shoes.
It's a great story, Susie. And I think then there's something about how, as leaders, we can influence the employees' experience, because if the employees feel well treated, well regarded, they feel involved, they feel appreciated, then they'll convey that sense to the customers. So if not, then they'll be indifferent. They won't be so interested, perhaps. So I think it's and often I think we will attribute employee behavior, which is managed by themselves to a very large extent, to themselves rather than the leader as well. So the leader does impact the climate, because you take someone from a climate that is not so healthy, where, for example, there's a sense of less flexibility, a sense of ownership, a sense of responsibility. Take the same person, put them in a different climate, which is more positive, more affirming. The same person next door works completely differently. So as leaders, I think we can really be mindful of how we play a major role in the experience of the employee. So
it was interesting on television. There's a series running at the moment where a very well-known chef in high-end dining and a colleague who's a journalist and a food critic visit 5-star hotels around the world and work in them to get the customer experience. And the one this week was a hotel right up in the north of Scotland called the Torridor. I think it's called the Torridor. And it's a private hotel, very, very expensive, exclusive, in a beautiful location, but miles from anywhere. And they actually asked the owners how they'd created this wonderful experience. And they explained all about the sort of family nature of it and the lovely rooms and all of that. And they took them to the staff quarters, because one of the chefs, all the staff have to stay on site. And the family had invested a very, very substantial amount of money on making the staff quarters as best as they possibly could. They had the most wonderful sort of little studio flats overlooking a lake. And when they then talked about how did this play out, the owners of the hotel said, well, people are coming here for a very special experience. And the last thing, and our staff act as their family, the point that you were making, Susie, earlier. And that we see investing heavily in really nice staff accommodation and areas that they can grow their own vegetables if they want to. And I mean, the whole thing was very, very different. And you were left with this feeling of, hey, I don't mind going 700 miles into the depths of north of Scotland to go and stay at a place like this, because everyone seemed to be really in it and with it and on board with it. And yet, thinking of all the 5-star hotels we sometimes stay in, I'm always amazed where if you open a door in a conference room and you go through into the corridor behind, you go from what is a 5-star hotel into something that's like a shambles and a shanty town somewhere in a poorer part of the world. And you think, how does this play out in terms of the customer experience?
Well, again, I think most leaders or businesses, they think that they are saving money by not investing in the behind the scenes, the employee areas, the employee training, these types of things. But that is directly tied to the bottom line, because if I hate working there, I'm not going to give you the performance that you need. If I don't like working there, I'm going to go out and tell other people this place is really whatever. If I don't like working here, I'm not going to buy here, and I'm not going to bring my friends to come here either. And I'm going to quit. And what's the cost of turnover? One of the most expensive expenses for business. So I always say, if you don't think you can put the money here, you're really hurting yourself, because you have to market 10 times as much because you're not maximizing what you have.
Yeah.
So Michael's, I noticed in the chat, Michael's asking, I think it's one of your friends, Ara, about what we all like to have new customers. So what would be your tips for getting new customers?
I think some of the things you said, Susie, you talked about being intentionally available to people and reaching out with intention to reach in when you're in a new environment, to go out and, in the Starbucks example, give people a coffee and say, hey, we're here, and we like being here. And the other notion is contagion. There's a lot of work done on the fact that leaders are contagious. So the mindset, the behavior, the awareness, the willingness, the goodwill, the way you treat your own staff, all of that means that people will look at you and have a sort of similar experience. It goes back to what you said, Ira, about the same person being better in a different environment, because the environment becomes better. Yes. So maybe part of the answer, but I'll leave it up to the experts, is to be intentionally contagious in a positive way.
Yes, and also when you're doing your measurement, you come up with basically 3 groups of people. The ones who rate you 8, 9, or 10 are the promoters. They're already out there talking about you and spreading the word. The ones at the bottom are detractors, kind of like the 1, 2, 3, 4, like the 5. Like they're the ones they're anti-marketing. They're saying don't waste your time. And then in the middle are the neutral people, the passives. So there's something to do with each one of those groups. Number 1, keep your promoters promoting. Don't take them for granted. Stay in touch with them. Listen to them. Give them special things. Give them special privileges. I know a company that has really customers who love them, and then all of a sudden they cut back and cut out some of the passes that they gave them for free or whatever, and they were furious. And it's like, these people are your marketing team, and you just made them really mad. Now the passive people in the middle, what do I need to do to get them to go, oh, wait a minute, this is a cool place, or I really like this? Now that applies inside too. Some of your employees love working there. Make sure you keep in touch with them, keep thanking them, keep learning from them, and upping the game for them. And then the ones who are, I'm just here, what can you do? Is it more training? Is it more development? Is it more listening? Just asking, staying in touch, and seeing how many of those you can move up that scale.
Exactly. That's a great point, Susie. And I think, it makes me think of other points, which would be to really pay attention to the others' agenda. So as leaders, we have our own agenda, things we're trying to achieve with our teams. And then the question is, how much do you understand what the other is trying to achieve? What's important to them, their style, their needs? So that's one thought. And then to Michelle's question directly, I think there's something about considering what kind of model you want to work to. So are you more transactional, or are you more strategic and focused on partnerships? If it's transactional, then maybe it's more a question of trading on price or something like that. If it's more strategic, more of a partnership flavor to it, it's like, how do you maybe offer something that exceeds the expectations, as you're saying, Susie, of the other? So maybe you offer something kind of gratis, maybe a couple of hours consulting, or an article you think would be of interest to them. Say, hey, I read this article, I thought of you, it might be interesting. So I think we noticed this, right? When other people are generous towards us. Like Ian, you sent me a book the other day, right? I think, which I remember. So thank you for that. So we noticed these kind of acts of generosity as a way of, sustaining, or either initiating or sustaining or building relationships. But I think people like it when you're doing something for them. I think, especially if it's more of a partnership, strategic orientation. And I think the only other point to add would be about, kind of how you show up as a person. So, people buy from people, as they say. So you might have the best expertise, the best resources, the best knowledge. It might not be the reason why people choose you, It might be more like, is this someone I can trust? Is this someone I can relate to? Do they understand what I'm trying to achieve? What's on my agenda?
Trust is huge. At the end of the day, trust is the core.
Yeah.
But this has so many links. I'm looking at Brit now, because she's seen the film clip, to the conversation with Frans de Waal, because he and it's a recorded conversation, so it's not up on the website yet. But he was telling me the other day that although this concept of alpha males, so in the human world, we might say, the really macho boss full of testosterone who leads from the front and sort of causes chaos and destruction wherever they go. He was saying that when you look at that in the primate world, they don't last very long because they've never built any generosity as they've been climbing literally up the tree of success and power. And that the male or the female that spent time babysitting the children, grooming each other, providing food, sharing food, is often the male or female that ends up being the one that they all turn to in a crisis to help them through it. And they naturally become the leader as a result of that generosity and that caring nature and that empathy. It's just fascinating, the connections that one can make. And he said, time and time again with the experiments he did, the alpha male, if it was aggressive, lasted a year or two until someone else came along and bashed them off the perch. But the alpha male and females who were kind and generous and considerate were the ones that actually lasted a long time.
Yeah, many parallels.
Yeah.
We're not that different.
So Ira, you mentioned books, and when we started this conversation, just before we went live, I grabbed some books off my bookcase because you reminded me, Susie and Ira, of lots of the things that they're not new. And I'm sure most of the work you're doing, just like the conversation, Matthew, you had about primates, we've known about for a long, long time, right? There's nothing new about these concepts. But is there anything new in the locker in terms of perspective on these things, or are we just going back to some fundamental principles and common sense that's been forgotten, is not some common practice anymore? Is there anything really, really spicy and new in the locker?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, really fascinating. What I think of in response to your question is each of us is new. So what we do is we bring insight to leaders. So you're right. I mean, you can go back to the Stoics, for example, go back to, the Greek and Roman philosophers, and it's curious that it's still, well, firstly, it's curious it's still relevant, which is probably not a surprise. And maybe even more interesting is, we continue to need to learn it in a way. And maybe it's what Frank de Waal might have said as well in terms of evolution. What we don't carry with us in evolutionary terms is learning from previous generations. Because in terms of evolution, we need to adapt to our current environment. So if you look at this from a sociobiological perspective as well, we don't inherit the knowledge or learning or experience of our parents. You think, well, why not? Wouldn't that be really efficient? But it's because it would stop us from adapting to our current reality. So I think what's new, I'm interested to hear what Susie has to say as well, is it's new for each of us as leaders and as individuals, discovering maybe our own belief systems or our sort of darker recesses in our mind, not to make that frightening, but to look at what our assumptions, what are our beliefs, how's our experience in life shaped us as leaders? What are our assumptions fundamentally about what does it mean to be a leader? Hey, I'm the boss. Maybe I'm a young leader. I think I should be, more knowledgeable, more powerful than everybody else. And yet, over time, with the complexity of life, complexity of organizations, how can anyone possibly know it all? So I think the newness is for each of us to discover our own pathway. But Susie, tell me to hear your thoughts about Ian's question.
So everything old is new again, right? And one of the new things is virtual experiences, right? They were always there. They were growing anyway. I had started to build into my work every single thing that I said to my clients, or we worked through each step. I would say, how does this apply to your online experience, to your phone, your call center? That was already there, but now it's just like times 1,000. And I work with a wonderful credit union here on the west coast of Florida. And we were working on a project where one of their departments wanted to have better teamwork and more like partnerships with the other departments, more of like think of themselves as internal consultants. So we were working on a series of things that we were doing to shift that mindset and create connection. And then the pandemic hit. And so we had to switch the whole project to online. We decided, let's take advantage of this. Let's think of how this can actually be better than when they would go job shadow in person or something. So they had to meet one-on-one with different departments and connect, and they had Zoom time. And then they came and presented what they learned, and the people from the other departments wanted to jump on. And they actually have created so much synergy, taking advantage of, well, online, I can talk to you one-on-one, and I can spend a little more time, and we can connect whenever we need to. We don't have to go somewhere and put a lot of other things into it. So always thinking of how can the virtual experience apply these same things, but even think of where can you add that little extra? Like, how can you make it an advantage that you're connecting this way? And if you do not think about how your employees find your website, how they fill out an application, whether it's in person, whether it's online, that upfront experience is the number one thing I would say for everybody to look at. What's the first impression when you even apply for a job, when you even think about going to that restaurant, when you walk into your first day on the job? What happens to you there? And keep looking at that over and over again, because that's new. That's new to them. They're brand new when they're walking in.
I think it's an interesting thought. What was going through my mind as we were talking about, we relearn, or it's new, but it's old. It rather suggests, but this might be wrong of me, that you've got to be of a certain age before you start to get to the point where the new is then the old, but actually it's a new version of the old, and it's your version of the old. And I was thinking, that there was a very sad news piece on BBC News about a week, maybe 10 days ago now. Ola Gerlin, who's an Irish journalist who works at the BBC, was reporting on the Yemen. And she was in what you and I would call a bombed out sort of shell of a building. And there was a little boy called Ahmed, who was blind and had been blind from birth, teaching the rest of the class about the Quran and about, I think it was science. I think there were two things. And he'd just naturally done it. He, if you like, putting it in the terms that we started this conversation, he wanted his customer experience, i.e. his friends and chums in the school, to have the very best experience they could in a building where bombs were going off, bullets were being fired, there was no water. And I thought, he's only 9, and he's expressing all the sort of leadership, generosity, empathy, customer care, trying to make it as good as he could for his fellow children. And I'm thinking, he's 9. So where does that, sorry? And totally blind. So where does that come from? What is it? He hasn't learned it from his parents, I don't think. There was no discussion about that. He just got up and started teaching the class and was very good at it. And I just think that's a real case of leadership. Think about others, do it as well as you possibly can. He was getting feedback from his friends because they all applauded him, or they walked home with him through the sort of shell holes and the sniper bullets and everything every afternoon. But it just struck me when we were talking, there's something inherent that you have to capture. Your authenticity piece, perhaps, is where it sits.
And I think too, everybody, there's usually someone that you saw do something that you remembered, whether it was your parent or a friend or something in a movie or whatever, that you saw a role model, you saw something, and then you just assumed that was the way to treat people, or you really got touched by that moment. So it goes back to leadership. You are the role model. And when people they're watching to see how you're treating people and how you're listening and, how you're building trust, and then that will be reflected back at you. And we've all seen it where one leader is maybe a little more self-absorbed, or you can't really trust them, or they're promoting them, getting themselves up. And the other one's working on building that team and creating that energy. And again, if you measure the success of the ultimate success on the long run, it's always the one who did listen and care and look outside themselves. People know that, people feel that, people appreciate that.
Yeah.
Is it also true, Susie and Ira, in the work that you do? I'm just looking at the other comment that's come in as a chat message here around the experience that your customers first have with you. Again, Matthew, I'm thinking, and Brit, the relationship between this and leadership. So I've had some relationships where I've been either led by or led somebody else, and it hasn't gone so well first time round. Yeah, it's been challenging. I think that's the correct phrase. And yet, because of that, and in spite of that, we've had an amazing relationship, or in a customer sense, I've become a raving fan of that business because it wasn't the problem we had, it's the way it was dealt with.
Yes.
And I remember a story of Lego, and actually I quoted it in one of the programs I was running because I had one small piece missing, and my dad wrote away to Lego. I think it was a little hand from a little piece. And but it wasn't just the fact they replaced it and what they did and everything. It wasn't 1%, it was 1,000,000% on top of that experience, which then turned you from a potential detractor, as you're saying, Susie, to an absolute raving fan, and the story gets told 1,000,000 times. And does the same thing happen in leadership? I hope we could encourage that, because you make mistakes, but it's not the end, it's the beginning of a relationship.
Exactly. Research also shows that exactly what you're saying, that if you messed up and you recovered in a great way, they are more loyal to you, because they know nobody expects you to be perfect, but if they know that if something did go wrong and you told them about it and they jumped on it and fixed it, then they really build more trust. And I don't want to over Disneyize you guys. I've worked with a lot of great clients, but this is one more Disney story I will tell you real quickly. It's called the ferry boat story. And it's when you take the ferry boat from the parking lot to the Magic Kingdom every morning, everyone stands in the front of the boat. And so it goes over kind of, what's that called, with the bow down. And so they tell the driver, make sure you don't turn into the wake of the other boat, because you'll get a wave. And of course it happened on a cold January day. And yes, it does get cold here in Florida. And the water went up to people's knees and back down and took purses, cameras, tickets, baby toys, all sorts of things. And people are freezing and they're panicking and their stuff went down. And Disney had a system in place that you called this number called control. If there was an emergency and you did not know what to do, it involved safety, it involved guest service, they called control. By the time the boat got to the other end of the lagoon, there was the guest relations manager, the security manager, the risk person, they all show up. They take them to this theater that's not open yet till a little later, and they have, come on in, sit down, food and beverage show up, hot chocolate, bagels, things to eat. Risk management, what did you lose? Do you want us to replace it? Do you want to write a check, or do you want to go down to the store and get a new camera? It's on us. The entertainers came and showed up. Dapper Dan singing, the barbershop quartet. Everybody just stepping in, doing their thing. And at the end of that thing where we got you handled, we got you replaced, we got you free tickets, we got you food and beverage, who do you think showed up at the end of that experience? Mickey and Minnie, for your own personal meet and greet and picture. What do you think people walked away and said about that? Like, they screwed up. They went, oh my God, like they did a big thing. They made it right. And I didn't have to fight them. You know how many times when you're the customer, you have to go in and keep explaining and fighting and begging to get what you deserve, let alone extra. So if you apply that inside too, you're a leader, you're going to make mistakes. So, what can you do? Can you have some things ready that if a mistake happens and it might happen, that you would do this, or this? but then just go that extra mile. Step in, own it, fix it, and make it better right away. And then you have people who really think, I can depend on you and I can trust you. And that is the baseline of bottom line success, really.
And you called that control. That was the number that was dialed, yeah? Can you just give me that number so I can write it down? I think I need that in my leadership every day, right? That would be a cool number.
Actually, they had two numbers. One was if you just had like a guess question you didn't know, and one was if it was a more serious. And they're still in your head. I'm not going to say them because, for Disney's sake, but it's true. Every organization should say, where do I turn when I don't know an answer to a question? Where should I turn if there's an emergency and I have to respond and I don't know what to do? And I don't care if it's your first day on the job, if you have those two pieces of information and they're systems that work, you have confidence. They got my back. So then I can step up and help people.
It's a philosophy, isn't it? And it reminds me of a manager in a hotel that we were working with some years ago who would issue with all of her staff at every level, an empowerment contract in addition to all the other stuff that she would do as a leader and a manager of the hotel. And this empowerment contract was written something like, I, the manager, the boss, empower you to do whatever you need to do to make any guest's experience the best it could possibly be. Just like this is your control number, basically. But just do it. Don't need to come to me. Just do it. And people are saying, are you crazy? Why would you give everybody a contract like that? They'll spend a fortune on credits. They'll get all their mates into the hotel rooms and give people free lunches and free beers and stuff. And she said, you know what? She said, since we've been doing it, it's not cheap, she says, but it's the right thing to do. But trust me, if I have to get involved at some stage, it's going to cost a lot more than people at the coalface can do right on the front desk there to put something right immediately and take ownership for it. And it was so inspiring to hear that. And you spoke to some of the staff there and they breathed it. They lived and breathed it. And you just know that they were empowered to do that. Yes, there were some things they checked, but mostly didn't need to check. Yeah. Sorry, your meal wasn't right. You won't be paying for it. No problem. Yeah. Genius. So simple, so easy, but so brave as well.
Yeah. Which goes back to the trust piece.
Yeah. I have some colleagues that I work with sometimes, bring into projects sometimes that work for the Ritz-Carlton in the past. And that's exactly what they say, is that they are empowered to make it right and fix it. And then they have ongoing communication every single day. They come in and they say what happened, how they handled it. They assess whether that could have been handled differently or not, but they, do it, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll learn and we communicate. And he used to say that if one employee or one guest didn't have any water in his room or refrigerator or whatever, and it happens several times, and you're paying a lot of money, and you're like, okay, there's not even a bottle of water in here. So they just all started communicating, and they realized that one shift thought the other shift did it, and and then pretty soon they were laughing because everywhere the guy went, somebody was saying, "Can I get you some water, Mr. So-and-so?" Because you have to communicate, though. You have to go back and say, "This is what happened. How can we do it better next time so maybe that never happens again?" And is there still anything else we need to do for this person to make it right? And again, this is internal as well as external. It's just applying the same good principles and thinking to both of your groups.
It would seem that we've come nicely round in a circle from where we started, which is great. And believe it or not, we've been talking for nearly 50 minutes, which is wonderful. It just shows once you get 5 people who just want to talk, you see what happens, which is great. And I hope Michelle has been enjoying the conversation, because he's been feeding us with all sorts of comments, which has been great. Susie, just before we go, you've got a couple of young leaders somewhere in the world who come and see you and they say, Susie, give us a tip, give us one thing that starting off our leadership career that you say, if we focused on this, it would really help us in our overall life experience. What might that be?
Well, I'll give you a 1A, 1B.
Okay.
One is figure out what you want the customer to say ultimately, and then make sure that you thinking that that's what you want your employees to be feeling and saying about working there. And then where to start, I call it the 111. What's the first impression that they have when they come there? And that can be each day or the beginning of their job. What's the last impression? So how are people treated at the end of the day or on the way out or after the meeting? And then find one leverage point in the middle where if we just change this or we do this a little differently, it will have a big impact. So try to focus on that 1-1-1.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. It's been wonderful. We could carry on talking all afternoon, I'm sure, but it has been super. And it's great always to hear a different voice and a different viewpoint. So thank you so much indeed.
And a different accent.
And a different accent, yeah, I suppose. Oh yes, all right. And Ara, thank you for sort of making the suggestion and setting it up, because it's been fantastic.
A pleasure.
And just to let you know, next week it's very different. We've got 5 young students from a London academy in North London, talking with the mayor of the borough in which their school is based. The school is helped by Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. So I know that won't be, I know Ian won't like that because he's a Chelsea fan, but Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. And they're just going to be chatting to us about what leadership is like for a 16-year-old, 15-year-old, 17-year-old, and what their expectations are. And we're going out at 9 o'clock UK time, so it's going to be a little bit earlier so that they can then get back to their studies once they've finished having a chat with us. So that's next week. And then we've got lots of other exciting things coming up on future conversations yet to be planned. But anyway, Susie, Ara, Brit, Ian, lovely to see you all. Thank you so much.
You
too.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ira.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
lovely weekend.
You too. Thanks a lot. See you next time.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.